Good to be an American.
This is great. Finally, we got some justice. Pay for democracy. Well, yeah, we know it's all gonna happen, but for tonight we can celebrate. The worst that we think of will happen, so. Anyway. So we have a nice group tonight. We have a few announcements, and then we've got Peter Meredith, who really doesn't need much introduction, because he's been a rep now for number 80, South County, and City. You're in the city.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I thought you were in South County. Okay.
South City.
Anyway, we all follow him. I have followed him on Facebook for the last 8 years. Before now he's turned out. So, but anyway, let's Kathy give a few announcements, and then we'll get into a great recap. We had a really good session, believe it or not. A lot of bad stuff, but some really good stuff. So let me get out of the way.
Thank you, Maureen. Hi, I'm Kathy Merrick, and I'm the membership chairperson for the organization. And but I just wanted to say tonight, we are, some of us within the leadership, we're sponsoring a fundraiser for Ray Hartman on June 18th, Tuesday, June 18th. And it's from 6 to 7:30. And it's all the information about it we have on a flyer that we'll be happy to give to anyone who's interested. See me or Maureen before you leave tonight. We have all the information about how to sign up online. And please, and I wanted to say, the donations to attend are from reasonable to generous, whatever you would like to contribute to attend, but they are, it starts very reasonable. So we hope we'll see all of you there on the 18th. Wanted to tell you, we are so excited about another thing tonight. We have found out not that long ago that our ballot measure will be on the November ballot to give us a chance to regain reproductive freedom. And we're so excited about that. And so, and it's also the time, any candidate that you are going to support, Connie tonight, and Connie Steinmetz, who's here. And what district, tell us again, Connie? 87. And also, we have
Gary Wester.
Gary
107.
107, which is where, Gary?
In O'Fallon,
Oh, okay. Well, great. Good. So glad you're here with us tonight, and wanted to say, please support them if you can. Get your friends in those areas to support them. Anyone that you're going to support, now is the time. Go online, find their website. There will be lots of information there for you on how to get involved to Canvas, phone bank, whatever you feel like doing, text bank, whatever you're good at, there'll be a place for you. So now's the time, folks, now till November. So, and one last thing I want to tell you, you may have read in the paper that the Adopt a Highway program has been discontinued. But we had a section of Clarkson Road, a 1 mile section that we, as Chesterfield Township Democrats, maintain, and we quarterly would pick up trash. Well, we have found out though that those who are already registered and a part of that program are going to be allowed to continue. We'll be able to continue doing it until March of 2026. So the next date, I believe, is August 3rd. So we'll have another chance to sign up. We'll be doing that. And lastly, if anyone here is not a member of Chesterfield Township Democrats, and you do not have to live in Chesterfield Township, I do not. I live in Maryland Heights Township now. But anyway, we'd love to have you as a member, and we're contributing to candidates and causes, especially in this election. So thank you so much for your time and for coming.
All right.
Oh, don't forget to see one of us about the fundraiser information before you go. I'm sorry.
You can sign up.
Sorry.
Sign up here. We just need to know who's getting invitations, and we've got printed, but we'll also email them to you because it'll.
Right, if you just sign up
Sign
if
up
you're
here
interested, and then be sure to get a flyer that we have before you leave.
But we'll send you an electronic one as well. So, great. Well, true to form, Peter is first a dad, and everything else follows. If you follow him on Facebook, he's got a lovely family of 3 daughters, born in raised in Howard Grove, and is such a wonderful Democrat. He's represented us so long and so hard doing battle, so now he can really spend time with his kids since he's turned out, and you can talk about who's going to replace you and things like that, but come on, we appreciate you.
for having me. A lot of familiar faces, so that's good to see. I don't think I need to introduce myself since I do know most of you, or we've crossed paths at least at various points. But short version is, I've been doing this 8 years. I'm termed out. Because of term limits, that 8 years makes me one of the experts in Jeff City, which is sad, I have to say, because I've still only been doing it for 8 years. And that's true, especially with things like the budget, which I'll talk a lot about here today. I've spent the last several years as the ranking Democrat on the budget committee, really working especially alongside Deb Lavender, who you all know very well, who I learned a lot from when I first got there, actually, because she had been there 2 years before me. She took 2 years off, as you probably are aware. But we spent a lot of time really digging into the budget in our time there. And I'll be honest, there aren't a lot of people that have the bandwidth or opportunity to do that, even of the folks that are there. So even of the folks that make it to a full 8 years, there were really only she and I and maybe the budget chair that had been there for 8 years and really dug into the budget and had a decent idea of what was in the budget. And we're all gone next year. And what I gotta say is I have watched every year that I've been there, the knowledge of people leave. And it's gotten worse every year. And the process itself has also gotten worse every year. And so that's, I end up talking about process a lot and rules a lot because it's the stuff that's not sexy, it's the stuff that's not exciting and interesting, but honestly, it's really the stuff that makes a difference in outcomes. And what I've seen year after year after year in Jeff City is the process has gotten worse. The dialogue has gotten worse, the relationship has gotten worse, relationships have gotten worse, and the actual understanding and the work that people do has gotten worse. We've got a lot more campaign slogans being thrown around back and forth, honestly, especially between Republicans at each other right now. But the actual work, not a lot's getting done. And in the budget, that was especially true. When I first got there, our first several years, we would be there every day of the week until often midnight or later, sometimes 2 a.m., for half of session, literally. The budget committee would work from 8 a.m. We wouldn't get breaks for lunch. We would get breaks to go up to session, and then we would go back to committee. And we would be there all night. We go line by line for everything in the budget, and we'd ask all kinds of questions, and we dig into all kinds of things. Every year that I've been there, that has gotten less and less robust, to the point that this year, we weren't sure what to do with our time. I had so much more time than I've ever had, because we were usually out of there by the same time as everyone else. What that wasn't on budget, maybe 4 or 5. We had days where we would just be done at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. and nothing's getting done. But that meant we weren't there digging into the departments, asking the questions about what is happening in the budget. And that's a real shame. We got to the amendment process, and for the first time in my experience there, the budget chairman dropped his substitute budget. Substitute budget is basically the main budget we're working with 40 pages of spreadsheets of changes that he made to the governor's budget. And he didn't even allow us to ask questions about his changes. We didn't even have an opportunity to do that. Now, you may know he's running for treasurer right now, and he had a fundraiser to get to in another town later that day. So instead of us staying and working till midnight or later, as we have done every year that I've been there when this substitute has come out, he told us we were not allowed to ask a question. Meanwhile, he said, well, you'll be able to come back on Monday and we'll have executive session. That's where we offer our amendments. So we literally had a weekend to come up with our amendments to his version of the budget without having a chance to ask questions on the budget. But then, for the first time ever in my time there, first time ever, he arbitrarily set a cap for how long we could be debating the budget, or doing amendments, and said it's gonna be a total of 3 hours. So actually he said 4, but it ended up getting cut to 3. Normally that is a 10 to 12 hour process where we offer all of our amendments. He also said that's gonna be our chance to ask questions about his budget. So we came back with all these amendments. We only even had time to offer 25% of the amendments that we had filed, that we had worked our butts off over the weekend, that staff had worked like crazy all hours of the night to get done. We didn't even get to offer them and have debate and a vote on them, let alone asking questions about his budget. So that goes on and on. We didn't have public hearings this year for the budget process. That's actually required. Instead, on the day that he released his sub, He just said, oh, by the way, I'm making a call for public testimony. Do we have anyone here? Seeing none, and we moved on. So we didn't even have public testimony. So when I say the process itself has just degraded in my time there, it is not an understatement. And I really worry about that. Because the budget, when I came in, we fought tooth and nail, sure. But that's where real bipartisan work got done to get good things in the budget. Now the last 2 years prior to this year, we had enormous success in the budget, I gotta say. And largely that still happened thanks to the Senate and the Senate budget chair. We had a really good relationship with him and were able to work with him and basically overpower the budget chair in the House. We got a lot of really good moderate policy and frankly, spending of Biden bucks. So we got a lot of long overdue investments in Missouri for roads and bridges, for schools, for things that had been underfunded for decades, 20 years especially in our state. That was really successful. This year, we had less success there. Because the process got truncated, even later, the point where we then mesh our budgets with the Senate, they cut that out of the process, called conference committee. It's where the House and Senate come back, and we get to vote on all of the differences between the House and Senate. They said, we don't have time. So instead, they agreed behind closed doors on the outcomes and just said, we're taking it to a vote. That's all we did. So we ended up with not as good a budget this year, but we're still spending some good Biden bucks. I think that's something we should talk about every day as Democrats, in this election cycle especially, that we've got good investments happening in Missouri right now, in roads and bridges especially, in rural broadband, in some in our school infrastructure, higher ed infrastructure, some of the buildings that have had long overdue maintenance needs. We've got a lot of money from the federal government. And while the Republicans are going to complain and moan about government, federal spending, they're also going to brag about, look at all these things we're investing in, and not mention, but we actually fought against all of that. They actually fought, Republicans fought to not get that money that we're now spending on our roads and bridges. And meanwhile, they're then cutting taxes so that we're not going to be able to do it next year or the year after. And I'm very, very worried about our revenue situation going forward. Big picture, budget. Things to know. Missouri has the lowest paid teachers in the country. We have the lowest spending per capita on K-12 education of any state in the country. Now, that's bad, but it also means that we have a really inequitable education funding model because on average, our school districts actually do spend about the middle of the pack on education. But because our state portion of that is the lowest in the country, that means it's made up from local taxes. Which means if you live in a district that has great property tax base and high revenue streams, well, you've got plenty of money for education, so you're super well funded. You also have kids that probably have lower needs, so you don't even need as much money. But then the districts that have the higher needs and higher concentrations of poverty and a lower property value, they actually are the ones that are underfunded. So it makes the cycle of our education problem in Missouri worse and worse every year. We also are the only state in the country that's spent a decade decreasing higher education spending. Rather than increasing it like everyone else did, at least with inflation, we decreased it by 14%. And our K-12 education, they're gonna tell you we've got the largest K-12 budget we've ever had in the state's history. Well, yeah, if you're talking regular dollars. They love to complain about inflation, right? But they don't mention that when they're talking about how much we're spending, they're ignoring inflation. If you factor in inflation, which is real dollars, we've actually had a 30% decrease in our education spending in the state in the last 20 years. That means in real value of money, we are cutting what we're spending on our kids and our future year after year. Now this year, we are fully funding the foundation formula, which hasn't been adjusted for inflation in 30 years, 20 years. We are fully funding the school transportation line, which they had cut in half for several years in order to claim they were fully funding the formula. But the budget chair stood on the floor and said, we are calling this a one-time spend. We're putting language in the budget that says this is one time. And when asked why on the floor, I asked him, he said, Well, because we don't think that school district should expect this money next year. Why? Well, because our revenue is not good. Our revenue is flat right now, which they actually think is a good thing. Our revenue is flat in a really good booming economy where everyone else, their revenue's soaring, going gangbusters. They're able to increase all their spending with inflation and some. And in Missouri, we're stuck holding flat and saying we're gonna be in trouble next year because we passed a whole bunch of tax cuts in the last 10 years that are worse than what Kansas passed under Brownback, that everybody widely recognizes was a disaster. These tax cuts we've passed here, and they're still trying to pass more of, are exactly the same model of tax cuts that they did, actually more extreme, and they're pushed by the exact same people. When we have hearings on them, it's the same billionaires lobbyists. Rex Sinquefield and Laffer of the Laffer curve comes and testifies as to how magically, if we zero out income tax and zero out corporate tax, we're gonna have more money as a state. They forget that the Laffer curve is a curve with two sides. But all that to say, really bad policy coming forward, and we're gonna find ourselves in a bigger bind than we're already in. I said, we already have the lowest paid state workers in the country. We already have the longest wait times for mental health care because we underpay our mental health workers in the state. We already have the lowest paid teachers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where do we go if our revenue's going down and costs are going up? It's a real problem. So I'm very worried about our budget. As I walk out the door, that is the message I want people to understand going forward. If we don't have some big picture changes, we're going to be in real trouble in Missouri. Now, backing away from the budget, this session was, by all accounts, a train wreck. Now, I will tell you, from our perspective as Democrats, that's mostly a good thing. And that's why I think Maureen mentioned it was a successful session. It was, to a large degree, a successful session because most of the bills died. They passed 27 policy bills. 27. Now, if you look at the last decade or 20 years of bills, I'm just going to give you some examples. Bill statistics, here we go. Since 1994, we're looking at numbers like 158, 154, 197, 218, 218, 211, 1 year in 2067, because that's when they switched control, and there was a lot of confusion, and Republicans weren't able to govern when they took the majority. So there was a problematic year there where they couldn't get anything passed. But then back up to 182, 200, 231, on and on and on. Another low exception in 2020 of 31. Well, what happened in 2020? We had a pandemic, so we were only in session for a month. And they still, in 2020, passed 3 more bills than got passed in this entire session. So now this has been a trend for the last 5 years. Since 2020, it was 31, then 49, 44, 41, 28 this year. Now, the number one reason for this, Republican infighting, mainly in the Senate. Because we have a group of people who, honestly, we tend to call the terrorists, because they just hold everything hostage for a show. Because they're trying to cause damage, they're trying to shut things down in order to get attention. Now, this year, they made that attention about trying to pass one key priority for them. What priority do you think the far-right people want the most for Missouri? Change the, well, you're both right. I heard change the Constitution, and I heard abortion. And actually both of these things are right. Because the bill that they were focused on, and that they they filibustered everything else over this bill, was the bill to change the way that the Constitution is amended in the state. And basically, what they said very openly was, we don't want democracy to be the underpinning of this state anymore. For all of our history, our Constitution has been amended, even created in the first place, by a majority vote of the people. That means at our foundation, we are a democracy in this state. That means if the legislature isn't listening to the will of the people, isn't doing its job, or is passing things that the people don't like outright, or undoing things that the people got passed. The people have the ability in Missouri to go to the ballot, put something on the ballot after gathering signatures, and override the legislature. Now, we've done that for a long time with both constitutional amendments and statutory changes. In recent years, we've seen a lot more focus on the constitutional amendments. Why? Because when we pass statutory changes, they go back and undo them. They say, we don't care what you all voted for, we're gonna just undo it. So people said, well then, fine, we're gonna put it in the Constitution. Now, I wanna be clear, Missouri's Constitution is not like the US Constitution where it's like a bare bones document that's supposed to be a framework for how our government functions. No, our Constitution is full of all kinds of detailed things. Things that you would expect to be in statute. Things like the rules for bingo. Not kidding, in our Constitution. Or, as we've seen recently, like really dense rules about marijuana legalization, right? Those are not things that are designed to be permanent necessarily. They're designed literally to be law that the voters have said, if you're going to change this, we want to say over it. So really, all it means is it's a step above statute in that the legislature can't just undo it by themselves. They can undo it, but they have to send it to a vote of the people to approve it. That's all it is. Well, Republicans don't like this, so they want to get rid of it. And the way that they came up with this year to do that was essentially attacking the one person, one vote concept at its core. And said, how about, last year the biggest fight that the Freedom Caucus fought over? Gerrymandering the congressional districts. They were openly saying, we want to be able to rig our district maps to make sure that we are getting the most districts for Republican control. So even if we're a 50-50 state, or we'll say 55-45 Republican state, they want to have 70 to 80% of the seats. That's what gerrymandering is, right? It's literally taking the voice of one group that they don't like or they don't agree with and trying to make their voice smaller than their share of the population. Well, what they tried to do here was say, how about we make it, if you're going to amend the Constitution by ballot initiative, we make it that you have to not only have a majority vote of the people, but you also have to have a majority of the districts, or a majority in a majority of the districts. In other words, they want to be able to gerrymander the ballot initiative process and say, we want to rig that control too, for openly partisan purposes. Really, so a minority group, a minority viewpoint can maintain power over the will of the people. So that was a truly dangerous thing to the state. Now, I do believe that we would have been able to beat that at the ballot because it's a constitutional amendment. It would have had to go to a vote of the people. I think we could have beaten it. But that's why what you actually saw this year was an interesting scenario where Republicans unanimously passed this, right? They all agree they want to undermine democracy this way. The fight that they were having with each other was over whether to include other things in that amendment to try and trick voters into voting for it. And they made no secret of this. They openly said the point of these other things is not really to get them done. It's to try and get voters to vote for something that we know they don't actually like. They said that. Republicans are openly trying to lie to voters and trick them, just like they did with Dirty Missouri, by adding what we call ballot candy. In this case, it was a provision that would be the first thing listed on the ballot that says, only citizens can vote. Well, that's already in the Constitution. Only citizens can vote. They acknowledge that. They say, yeah, but it's worded differently this time. Okay. Well, actually, the way that we're wording it differently is more dangerous, to be honest with you, because it makes it so that instead of all citizens can vote, it would be only citizens can vote, which means if down the road they want to say, well, for this election, we just want to have property owners vote. Well, that wouldn't be unconstitutional under our state constitution anymore. If they want to put more limits on which people can't vote, they would actually be able to do that under that constitutional language. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think they were actually, most of them were even, they didn't understand that. Their point was, we don't care if it's already law. We want to put something obvious on the ballot so that people will, first thing they see is, Should only citizens be able to vote? Check the box. And they wanted to play on the sort of hate and division and xenophobic rhetoric about immigration right now that they're making the center of their campaigns. And they thought, if we make that the center of this, well, we'll dog whistle essentially to people that you want to vote for this, and they won't even need to read the rest of it. So that's what they were fighting over. Thankfully, enough of the moderate Republicans decided they didn't want to give in to the terrorists, we'll say. They really just didn't want them to win because they're internal fighting. I don't think it was about policy at all. It was just they didn't want to give them that win. That ultimately that bill did die. And I would say that is the biggest win of this session. Oh, and backing up, just to be clear, I said you were also right when you said it was about abortion. Because who was behind this push the most, and what were they saying on the floor it was all about? It was all about getting in front of the reproductive rights initiative that's on the ballot in November and try and change the Constitution before that goes up for a vote to try and make it harder for that to pass. Because that's really what this is about. It's about trying to stop people from undoing their radical abortion ban that they passed in 2017. Now, to be fair, they were also mad that we passed Medicaid expansion. They were also mad that we went over their heads on legalizing marijuana, minimum wage, right to work. I mean, the list goes on, right? Because we've realized Missourians actually support a lot of the progressive issues that Democrats stand for. We really do. They've just gotten fooled by all of these other rhetorical points, usually around culture war issues, that keep them voting for Republicans. And so they're voting for Republicans, but against the issues that they actually believe in. So when we give them an opportunity at the ballot to vote for these issues, we win. That also tells me in the long run, we can win again politically. We just have a lot of work to do still to get there. Okay, the other one big bill that did pass this year, I did want to mention, was the Education Omnibus Bill. This was a big deal. It is, in my view, an expansion of vouchers and trying to move toward a more privatized education system. They will talk about parents' rights and parents' choice and things like that, but I don't believe that they mean it. I really don't. What they want to see is a more siloed educational system with less oversight from the government so that you may have kids going to schools that are for profit, getting money from the state, and teaching that evolution isn't real, among other things. I like to say we head down a path where if it's all parent-driven and there's no accountability for what the education system looks like, we're gonna have kids siloed in basically the school of Fox News and the school of MSNBC. And while I might find myself more in line with the school of MSNBC, I still don't think that's a healthy way to teach our kids. No. Right? We need to have the foundations that we're holding to a standard of public education that are accountable to voters. And this is a real attack on that basic principle of public education. Aside from that, it also takes what is already, as I told you earlier, a very inequitable education system where we've got a real extreme between haves and have-nots. And we all know this. We talk about it when people decide where to live and they're looking at what school district am I going to be in. Because we know there's a big difference between the school districts with money and the school districts that are serving mostly kids in poverty. There's a big difference. Well, all this would do is make that extreme even more. Because if you've got a $6,000 voucher that, hey, one of my kids goes to private school, one of my 3 kids is at a Catholic school, if I can access a $6,000 voucher from the state, guess what? That's coming out of the state budget. And that's coming out of the money that would otherwise be going to public education. And it's going to a private school. But if that private school's tuition, we'll say it's $10,000. I mean, look at the Catholic high schools in St. Louis. Some of them are $15,000, $16,000. Well, you still have to be a family that can afford $10,000 to send your kid to school. Which means if you were a kid that wasn't going to that school because you don't have the financial means, this isn't likely going to change that. It's going to make it that the kids who are already able to afford those schools are now having money diverted from the public school system for them. And the kids that aren't able to afford that have even less money left over for our core public education that is supposed to be serving all. I think that's very dangerous, so I was very strongly against this bill. Nevertheless, our senators did some really excellent work on this bill and got a lot of compromises in this, a lot of good stuff. They actually got a teacher pay raise in there. Now, it's not paid for, but it's not paid for by the state. We expect the locals to come up with it, but it's a step in the right direction. They did repeatedly also promise that because of changes to the formula, the foundation formula is the way that we decide how much money each district gets. They have some really good changes to the formula in there that we've been fighting for a long time. Things like making it where the amount that a district gets reimbursed per student is based not just on actual attendance, but partially at least on enrollment. Because we know schools, especially in areas with high poverty, have enrollment that is much higher than the kids that show up from day to day. And so you may have different kids showing up, so they're all actually really enrolled there, but because of complications at home, they're not making it every day. Well, those kids actually cost more to educate, not less. But we're reducing the amount we reimburse the schools to educate them. And a school district has to be able to have the resources and the administrative overhead to educate everyone that's enrolled. If we're only reimbursing them for the kids that based on attendance, we're actually cutting short what their actual costs are. And that's not to mention all the other kids in the district that might go to a charter school or a private school that may end up switching over to a public school, at which point the public school has a constitutional obligation to educate them. So we have a situation like in St. Louis City where we have so many buildings that they kind of have to maintain space for all of the kids of St. Louis City, but we're only reimbursing them for the kids that actually are based on attendance. And so they're getting less money than they actually need to be a quality public school for everyone in the district. That was a really good change that they got in there. And they promised repeatedly, this is gonna mean another $700 million from the state for education. Now, I stood on the floor and said, really, $700 million from where? Because you just told us a week ago in the budget process that we can't even maintain our current level of spending on education next year because of our revenue situation and our tax cuts. How are you going to come up with $700 million? They didn't have an answer because they don't actually mean it. Because they can come back next year and just cut school transportation, for example, like they did 5 years ago, and say, well, we just won't spend on school transportation, but our obligation's still met. So we're going ahead with the voucher expansion, which is going to cost us $75 or $100 million a year. That's why I say this was a bill that I was strongly opposed to, but a very significant thing that did pass this year. I could go through a list of other bills. I would rather not, unless you're interested in any specific ones. There are a lot of small tweaks, good things that passed, minor things. There was a lot of bad things that thankfully didn't pass, but that did pass the House, I should say. But thankfully, because of Senate cluster infighting, they died. Those are things like banning anything related to diversity education in our schools, or equity or inclusion, broadly defined, loosely defined, that would have really undermined so many of the things that we do that are trying to create better outcomes for everyone in our state, and trying to create a more diverse workforce, because we found that actually means a better workforce in the long run. So that thankfully didn't happen. Censoring schools didn't get through. Expanding rolling back some of our child labor protections, that's something they passed in the House. Literally saying it's parents' right to decide if they want their kid to work, even in a dangerous environment, instead of going to school. Unions and others have fought for literally a century to get the protections we have in place now, to keep kids from being exploited. And now they're trying to roll those back, as some other states are doing. Meanwhile, they also didn't pass a good bill that would make it so that you have to be an adult to get married. You may know I've talked about this before. They still stand there and say it's a parent's right to marry off your kid. But it's not a parent's right to let your kid get medical care that their doctor says they need, that their parents say they need, that they want, but that our Republican leadership thinks is icky. I get very frustrated by that hypocrisy, so I'm sorry, I have to point that out. They don't really mean parents' rights. They mean we want a workforce that allows us to make money off of kids. And we know that poor parents are going to choose to let their kids be contributors, and that means more laborers for the world that they envision. They literally want to take us back to the age of the robber barons. So those are some things that happened this year that were fairly extreme. Obviously, some efforts to restrict abortion rights even more than they already have. Didn't get through, thankfully. Variety of other things I could talk about too. But I think at this point, I'd rather switch to questions. If you guys have any specific bills or issues or questions, I'd love to take them.
You mentioned that everybody's off the budget committee now that had any experience. How are those budget committees formed? And would there be any way there would be Democrats that you could actually do a training?
Yeah, so don't misunderstand. We have some really strong Democrats still on that committee. I don't want to undervalue the work that several of our other members do. I mean, Kevin Windham has been on there for a number of sessions now. He really is doing great work on there. But several others, really all of our members, I'm very happy with. The members are chosen by the minority leader. The Democratic members are chosen by the minority leader of the House, and the Republican members are chosen by the Speaker of the House. I will say what I've seen is the Republican members are getting less and less engaged in the process because they recognize that it doesn't matter what they do. The budget chair's in charge, and they just maybe have the one thing they're trying to get through him. The Democratic members are still doing a pretty good job of digging in. Betsy Fogel, Kathy Steinhoff, some really good people that have even only been in our 2 or 4 years at this point. I trust that they're going to continue doing good work. I'm just also recognizing that there is this constant loss. And for them, they're doing great work, but they didn't get the opportunity this year and last year, for example, of spending all day and night every day going through line by line. So they don't have that advantage. So that means they're coming in with even less next year. Now, Deb is an example of somebody who has actively spent so much time, even when she wasn't with us for 2 years. She was still meeting with our freshman members to help train them in the budget. And so we're certainly trying to help pass on what we do know. But in the long run, the process is what is really struggling. But we've got great Democrats.
Could I do a follow-up on that?
Yeah, sure.
Do you have, is it a different one?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Follow-up is, could you talk about the role of staff in legislatures like ours where there's where there is a constant rotation due to term limiting, the power they have in enacting things and becoming even more powerful than they were before. And also in good ways and bad.
Yeah, and I will say, that's something that rhetorically is pushed back against some Republicans that, hate bureaucrats, and it's like, well, term limits have made it so that the bureaucrats in the building are literally the only ones that know anything about what's happening here. And we rely heavily on them every day. Our staff work their tails off, both the partisan staff that we have as a caucus, but the nonpartisan staff too. I mean, the budget team that they have is incredible, and they have a wealth of knowledge, but they also have had a lot of turnover in the last several years. Well, they've been overworked. They've honestly been overworked and underpaid. We've got the lowest paid state workers in the country, right? And they're working crazy hours with horrible expectations from the Republicans that kind of treat them like dirt. And so we've lost a lot of them. We still thankfully have some of them that just, even the new ones are working their tails off to understand it. But they have more institutional knowledge for the most part than the elected reps. And similarly, lobbyists.
Yeah.
I will say lobbyists are truly the most powerful ones thanks to term limits, because they're the ones that are there year after year. They know if they've got a priority that isn't going to happen this year because so-and-so's over there, and they just have to wait 2 years till they're gone. And now they've got a whole group of people that doesn't know why their thing wasn't popular 2 years ago, and they can start all over again, educating them. Now, in some cases, those lobbyists are actually lobbying for good things that I agree with, and I'm grateful for them. But in other cases, it's for a client that just wants to make money. And it's hard to tell the difference when you've only been there a couple of years, and they're the only one that seems to know what they're talking about. So their power is definitely gone up. Don?
Yeah, so, and thank you for all your many years of hard work and leadership. And, how can we train the next generation or generations that are in the waiting here? And we got a problem right now with our party nationally with the 18 to 35 age group. I think in large part because they're just running scared and with all the chaos that you're talking about. But if we're gonna win elections, we need everybody, young and old, supporting these messages that to roll back this autocracy that's taking place.
Yeah, so, okay, the question is, how do we engage, I guess, the younger folks, I guess, the younger generation, especially in making sure that they're well informed on what's happening on what these complicated things, whether that's the next generation of electeds, but also just the voting population, and making sure that if we're gonna win, we need them engaged. I wish I had an easy answer. I mean, there has been an onslaught of misinformation and propaganda, especially in the last 4 and 8 years, where it seems like there just aren't consequences for lying, and there's no expectation of really truth and honesty in our reporting of facts. That makes it really hard. There's also a massive push of propaganda to just get people to disengage. And that's a lot of our base, frankly. People that have just think it's all broken, which, I mean, I get it. It is pretty broken. But their response is, why bother? And it's so easy to fall into that, especially with the barrage of messaging coming at you. And there's plenty to criticize our own leaders and our own party for. So when the focus that you're getting is on, here are all the things that our own people, our own side's doing wrong, then they start to say, well, both sides are just as bad. Well, I'm sorry, there is truth that both sides are bad, right? That there are people making mistakes on all sides. But when one side's extreme is literally trying to take the rights away from people, to allow more oppression of minority interests, to allow a greater wealth gap, to concentrate more money in the hands of a few. Or, I mean, they're far right. We see literally marching in KKK rallies and things like that. Like, that's who they are. The far left, the extreme far left radicals, well, they want, what, healthcare for all?
I know.
They want everyone to have their basic needs met. They want to make sure everyone has a shelter, a home, and food. I mean, they are not the same. They are not the same. Now, do the Democratic leaders perfectly embody all of that all the time? No, because they're also trying to win too. And so we may be dissatisfied at times, but we have to help people understand that there is a real difference still between the two sides in what their long-term and even short-term goals are. And that it does matter, because I'm sorry, but democracy is at stake, fascism is on the rise, and it's scary what can happen. And this is a campaign group, like this is a Democratic club, right? We have an election cycle this year where a lot of the attitude going in Missouri is, well, we've already lost. Democrats can't win. It feels that way. We lost by 15 and 17 points last cycle. But I want to stress to you, we are actually still half or more of the population in this state. We really are. And if you look at the last election cycles, back to 2016 and before, when we were winning, and keep in mind, up until 2016, we had Democratic office holders in all the statewide positions but one. That's amazing when we think we're a dark red state now. But when you look at the turnout back then, it was relatively even from county to county and demographic to demographic. Now, certainly minority groups have had lower turnout always because of disenfranchisement and lots of other things that keep people from believing it's worthwhile to vote. But what we saw in the last couple cycles was a dramatic disinvestment from the national level and still investment on the other side of the aisle in the messaging, telling people don't bother voting, telling people Democrats are just as bad. And so what we saw in the outcomes was the bluer the county, the bluer the precinct, literally the lower the turnout. In the very bluest precincts, we were seeing 40% turnout in the last presidential cycle. 40%. In the reddest of precincts, we were seeing 90% turnout. 80, 90% turnout. I'm not exaggerating these numbers at all. Well, if you take that down to an individual level, well, it's not just the precincts we're talking about. It's not just people who live there. It's really, how likely are you to be a Democrat makes you less likely to vote. And how likely you are to be far right made you more likely to vote because Trump was engaging the less engaged people on the far right. And the less engaged people on the left were disengaging. Which means across the board, we were seeing essentially 40% turnout of Democrats and 90% turnout of Republicans. Leaning voters, I don't mean necessarily they consider themselves those two parties, but likely to vote those sides. Well, that's a 40-point margin. If we just change the turnout, that's a shift of 20 points. We win. Right? It is that simple, but it requires us to get a message out that makes people think it's worth voting, that they can believe again. And I will tell you, we can motivate people by being afraid of what's going to happen if Trump wins. Okay, that's one way to do it. Historically, Democrats aren't as motivated by fear. Progressive ideas, progressive voting isn't motivated very well by fear. We win when we give people something to believe in. When we give people something to be excited about, that the future can be better. I think that's the message we need to be focused on when we're going around talking to voters, when we're talking to our friends, our family members. We should be talking about, look at all of the really good things that have happened in our country since Biden's been in charge, and that's been without control of the House. Imagine all the good things that could happen if we actually had Democratic control again. What about our state? What are the things we could have as a state? Not just what all's going bad, but $500 million a year, we could get rid of tuition for higher ed. I'm not kidding. That's something that, it's a small drop in the bucket when we just spent $3 billion on one highway in this state. $500 million a year, we get rid of tuition. You want to motivate young voters, explain that to them, that we have $14 billion we're sitting on in the surplus. We could just save that for 10 years worth of free higher education, and then what dividends do we get from that in the long run? There is a long list of things I could suggest like that we need to give people a reason to believe that change could mean real change, not just we're not going to have the status quo we have now. Or not just we're not going to fall even deeper into the dark path that we're going down. But
fear is easy to put on a bumper.
yeah, I hate to say it.
Democrats aren't very good.
That's exactly right.
At putting anything on a bumper sticker to get people excited.
Hope and change was good.
Fear is easy.
Obama was good at it.
Yeah, and that.
We go through waves, right?
He showed up too.
But it's on all of us. It's not just on a charismatic leader. It's not just on a charismatic leader. It has to be on all of us in how we talk about this stuff. And motivating people with truth. Because you can only combat the lies of propaganda with truth. We can't combat it by just falling into the same path of lying.
But these people, they talk about the redder they are, the more they'll vote. That's because they're being motivated by fear to
Correct.
vote.
Correct.
So that works.
Yes. What I'm saying is that tends to work for people that are trying to grasp onto their own individual power and status quo. So it works for conservative goals. It doesn't work for progressive goals. And so
You just said Obama, it worked.
Obama wasn't fear.
No, he was-
Obama was motivating people on hope and
I know
change.
that.
That's my
I
point.
know that. That's what I'm saying. It worked for him. Where's from the national organization? Where's the messaging? I get lots of emails and texts
It's a
for
great
giving
question.
money.
Yeah.
But they never send a message.
Look, I'm not going to stand here and say that the National Party is our best.
Well,
but
state party too.
either way,
Yeah.
Parties are people that are just mostly volunteers and focused mostly on just getting enough money to keep their business going, to keep getting messaging out. Are they always the best at messaging? No. But part of the problem is we're Democrats. We're all critical of each other constantly, and all of us agreeing on what the best. I bet we can't agree in this room on the best messaging strategy for the state Democrats this year, which means what we have to capitalize on as Democrats is the bottom-up strength. It's the fact that we have a diversity of ideas on what good messaging is, and I truly believe that us sharing that messaging with our circles and them sharing that messaging with their circles, you're targeting what people need to hear in each individual level. That's my belief, because I don't expect there to be someone on high that comes down and saves us with the perfect message, because frankly, you also can't do that without billions of dollars. And Republicans are always gonna win that game. The propaganda that is paid for.
I disagree on both things you just said. It will never work, so let's not try.
Oh, I'm not saying go try.
Well,
The party has a responsibility to do its best.
We don't message well, so.
I'm saying I'm not putting my hope in the party leadership to be our problem solvers. I want them to do their best, and I want to help them do their best. But I think it's on us. I think it's on all of us, personally.
How's that working out for us?
Well, I don't think we've been doing it. I think we've been expecting there to be a great charismatic leader from the top to save us all, and that doesn't seem to be coming.
So, I'm sorry, can I go? Peter, what I've seen at the doors so far,
Yeah.
the doors I've knocked, the common thread here is women's reproductive health.
Yeah.
People are motivated to get out to vote for that. And that's the one thing that I've hit on with most of the doors that I've hit, and it's up and down the chain, doesn't matter how old they are or who they are, they're motivated on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The point was that people see most at doors right now to be motivated to vote because of abortion. Because they want their reproductive rights back. They want to control their own bodies and medical decisions. That is true, and that is absolutely motivating. And I think that actually hits to a heart of where I think we go is less focus on individual candidates and more focus on issues to drive turnout. We're expecting the highest turnout Missouri's had in a very long time because of that being on the ballot. But that's not the only issue that can motivate voters. I mean, minimum wage is going to be on the ballot again as well. We need to drive turnout by letting people know it's not just about, do you like this guy or that guy, when you might think both are bad, right? Like, most of the young people I talk to don't like anybody that's in office. They may like me by the end of the conversation, or they may not. But if we want to motivate them to vote, it's reminding them, you're going because you can actually vote to protect your rights. You can actually vote for what you want. And I think we need, personally, I'd like to see as a party us focus even more on that approach down the road, issue-focused organizing. Let's go.
Are we trying to measure the outcome of such low spending, low taxation, which is supposedly going to bring businesses to Missouri, which is a canard? But is anybody measuring that either in the legislature or in the executive?
Well, in the legislature, executive, maybe not. But there are lots of groups that are analyzing those numbers. Even the chamber, who I frequently disagree with on what they think is going to grow business, they mostly laugh at the idea that cutting corporate taxes is going to somehow grow Missouri. We've got the lowest corporate tax rate of any of our neighbors, of any state that has corporate tax, actually. And they know that that's not what's going to draw more businesses here. They have a lot of analyses that show what does actually grow. And a lot of times, what they're going to find is it's better infrastructure. It's rural broadband that Republicans have talked about for a decade, passing all kinds of bills that would create funds for rural broadband, but they never put money in them. What we need to be saying is Joe Biden did. We now have $300+ million to spend on rural broadband, thanks to Joe Biden, thanks to Democrats at the federal level. Those are the kinds of things that will grow our state. Investing in the microchips, that's happening again, thanks to Build Back Better. Or having quality schools. People will move to a state that they know they're going to get quality schools. I mean, these are the things that grow a state. There are lots of analyses on this. Budget project?
I don't mean just analysis. I just mean actual cases in which we find that a lot of businesses who Missouri people approach about moving here or expanding their facilities here are telling you, no, we think you guys are going to hell and we don't want to be any part of it.
Yeah, we've got some examples of that.
Has it been quantified that the atmosphere is not what they were hoping that it would be?
I'm not sure how to quantify it exactly, other than those studies that I'm talking about that are being done by groups like the Chamber. Like the Regional Chamber has a lot of that in St. Louis. Same with Kansas City, the Regional Chamber does. And the Missouri Budget Project has a lot of analyses of that, of what that aggregate looks like. And including businesses that won't come here because of culture war fights, that don't think it's a friendly state to many of their employees, that their employees aren't going to want to work here because they think that we have intolerant or bigoted policies as a state, because we do. Yeah, but I would also say, the other thing that I usually point to when we talk about this is, everybody that's engaged enough anyway, knows about the Brownback failure, right? And the number of Republicans that switched parties even in Kansas City, like Republican electeds that said, we're done, mostly women, switched over and said, we're Democrats now, because this is fiscally irresponsible. They about took themselves off a cliff. Well, they were able to undo it at the legislative level, and they just reversed those tax cuts. We can't actually undo it at the legislative level. We have to do it with a vote of the people, which is going to require either a big shift to a majority that's going to put something on the ballot, or an organizational effort, again, of ballot initiative to actually rewrite our tax code and make sure that we've got a fair and just tax code that's also providing enough revenue for the things we care about in the state. Because we don't want to be making the mistake Kansas made.
So I'm a little more optimistic on messaging, because you've talked about so many things tonight that we should be able to message in our door-to-door work, but we need more volunteers across the board, and we've forgotten how to do grassroots work in the Democratic Party. And you know, and I've had this debate with different candidates. Well, I have to pay volunteers versus, and bottom line is,
Well, then they're not volunteers.
they're not volunteers, right? And people know that when they knock on their door, okay? So, okay, I know, I understand, I got hips that aren't like they used to be, but we've got to get out there and knock for these candidates. We got to get our families out there knocking for these candidates, and we've got to engage all young people wherever we can make connections with them, to talk to them about what's at stake here with some of that simple messaging on not just reproductive rights, but health care. And because right now, in part because of the dysfunction of the Medicaid program, that trickles down to when we need, no matter what your income level, when you go to a hospital, that health care is degraded by the fact there's so much uncompensated.
Yeah, wait times and costs go up in healthcare. The more uninsured people you have, or the more people that are stuck in a cycle of bureaucracy that's preventing them.
So we got a lot to talk about.
I will say, unfortunately, Republicans have been really good at taking that the failures in Medicaid that they've caused, the wait times and things like that, to say, see, government healthcare doesn't work.
Messaging, you think they message better?
Well, when you have billions of dollars and don't care about lying, it's easier to message. But to your point, knocking doors and having conversations with people is one of the things that cuts through that messaging. Having a face-to-face conversation with somebody makes a dramatic difference in cutting through propaganda. Because when they're looking someone in the face, it's a lot harder to think that this is a monster that I'm talking to, which is what your news station is saying this person must be. Since 2020, I mean, recruiting volunteers was always hard. Post 2020, it is way harder. There is also some question about whether the way people want their information is the same. There's a lot more social messaging or social media messaging opportunities available to us now instead, that some people are more receptive to than a person at their door. And so if you can't get people to volunteer, first of all, yes, volunteer. More people volunteer and knock doors. If you don't want to knock doors, make calls. Those are still, I think, 1 and 2. If you can't, donate. Well, donate either way, because to the comment you made initially, paid canvassers a lot of times are actually more effective than volunteers, because you are able to control the message a little more, make sure that they are prepared and familiar with the main points of the campaign, and not necessarily getting off track with things that often happen with volunteers that I will still take any day. But putting money to help make sure they can actually pay to get that message out there is actually really important too. And on top of that, feeding the social media messaging with things that fight against propaganda with truth, I think is essential. And that might mean keeping an eye out on what folks at the party or candidates you care about are saying. If you see a candidate that you think just says things really well that reach you and are persuasive to you, that means they probably are for other people, so do share it. Retweet it, share it on Facebook, put it out there, make sure more eyes are getting on that message, because That's how the most effective messages rise to the top, if it's not just from one.
So what do you think's gonna be the issues that the Republicans are gonna do next session?
So the question was, what are the Republicans going to do next session? And I will say I have stopped trying to predict from session to session because I never know. We do know that they'll talk about a lot of these same issues that we've been talking about, whether it's abortion will always be on there, diversity questions and anything that they can stoke divisive issues like that, transgender rights, things like that. Those are going to keep coming up, no doubt about it. Guns, guns, guns. We will keep seeing things to make guns even more available because the solution to violence is more guns. That's the message they continue to say against all evidence and experience. They think more guns means we'll be safer. That's going to keep happening, and we need to fight back hard against that. But as far as what realistically gets done next year, I'm not going to try and predict that. And I will say, I think it depends a lot on what the outcome of this election is. Not just because of who's there, but if there's even a significant shift in numbers, a lot of the folks that are in more swing districts will start feeling more pressure to make sure that they're actually using a broader message. When they look at some of these issues, they're going to think, what is the actual broad voting population of a general election think about this issue, rather than just what is, right now, I'm telling you that the vast majority of Republicans, when they're looking at their re-elections or their next election, their only concern is how can I position myself to be the furthest to the right in that next election, because in a Republican primary, experience of recent elections tells them that's what will win their primary. And if they win their primary, they're in. So if this cycle, we see some of those Freedom Caucus people lose to people that they're calling rhinos, if we see some of those rhinos win re-election, Republicans in name only, that's what they call them, rhinos, if you don't know that, then we might see a shift there. Or if we see more Democrats winning, we may see more people going, well, actually, I may have a threat from the right, but I also have a threat from the left. So I need to actually have a more balanced policy position on things. That's how we get back to reason. And if that happens, we have a very different session next session. If we have a Trump-style politics wins up and down the ballot in Missouri, well, guess what we're going to see next cycle? Trump-style politics and all of the hot-button issues being all of the focus.
You refer to them as terrorists, the paper refers to them as Freedom Caucus, just like in Washington, so.
Yeah, well, they call themselves the Freedom Caucus. We call them the terrorists, and honestly, so do the about half the Republicans out there. They call them the terrorists in private. Sometimes in public, they've gotten bolder in public because they're getting attacked by them every day as rhinos, as secret Democrats, and all these things. I think objectively, what we saw this session and last session is they are willing to hold hostage things that are absolutely essential to the state of Missouri. The biggest example is the FRA. That's the money that is a voluntary tax on hospitals that they choose to pay, that then gets calculated into our overall Medicaid spend so that we draw down more money from the feds that goes back to the hospitals. So this is a system that brings in like 30 or 40% of our Medicaid money in this state. If that went away, we don't have Medicaid. Well, like our whole healthcare system collapses if that goes away. Well, they keep adding a provision in there that makes it sunset, meaning it expires every couple of years. So then they come back, and last time it expired, 2 years ago, is the first time we've ever seen them do it, and it was the Freedom Caucus people. This is why I call them terrorists. That literally said, we are okay with this dying unless we pass provisions that make it illegal for Medicaid patients to get birth control. Like, that's what they did because they thought it was a politically powerful message. This year, they said they weren't going to pass the FRA unless they passed the craziest version of the the IP reform bill. So they're literally holding hostage something that everybody knows, and that for 30 years has been non-controversial, that was started by Republicans 30 years ago, a Republican governor. That is what they're now saying, we're just gonna let the whole system fall apart unless you give us what we want. And then what we keep finding is, even when they get what they want, they then just ask for more. Because what they really want is the show. What they really want is the noise of, look at how hard I'm fighting against the establishment and the swamp. It's every single Bill Ickel ad you're gonna see this year.
You started out talking about term limits. How do you feel about term limits? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, so term limits is something that was on the table to change this year again, had some momentum. I will say term limits are one of the worst things that ever happened in Missouri government. And as we talked about, it made it so that the lobbyists became the most powerful people. It meant that by the time someone starts to have institutional knowledge and understanding of complex issues, they're gone. But it also means that people have less of an incentive to build relationships across the aisle or even within the same party, because they know that they're not gonna be there that long, or the other person they're dealing with isn't gonna be there that long. And within your own party even, they're likely your next opponent in a primary if you're gonna run for a higher office. So we've got, 5 reps or 3 to 5 reps in every Senate district, and you're all looking at each other going, well, we're all gonna be termed out in the next couple of years, so we don't want that Senate seat. So now you're actually my enemy, so I don't want you to have success. So everyone's just fighting with each other. And it's really sad. It hasn't actually lowered the number of years on average, weirdly, that people hold office, because there were a lot more people prior to term limits that would be in for 1 term or 2 terms, and then someone would run against them because they didn't like what they were doing, and they would get knocked out of office. We also had people that would stay for 40 years because their district thought they were doing a good job for them, sure. But what's weird is the average was still about where it is now. But now, when people are unhappy with their rep, they're less likely to actually run against them, because they'll just wait out until they're termed out or until they run for something else. So they're like, well, I can just wait a cycle or 2 and then I don't have to run against an incumbent. So you actually have a lot of counterintuitive things that came out of this, as opposed to what people thought. And a lot of people, really well-intentioned people, thought term limits sounded like a good idea. And I think even among Republicans, they're starting to agree, yeah, it hasn't gone so well. You might remember last cycle, we actually had term limits on the ballot for the couple of statewide positions that don't currently have term limits. And all of the conventional wisdom said it was going to sail through with a solid majority. Voters said no. They said, no, we don't want term limits on those. Term limits should be the will of the people and who they vote for, and it should be that simple. Now, there are solutions being proposed, like the one proposed this year would make it so that instead of just getting rid of term limits, we would make it a cap of 16 years total between the House and the Senate. So if you're not running for Senate, you can stay in the House for 16 years. If you go straight to the Senate, you can stay there for 16 years. Or you can have 8 and 8 like you have now, theoretically. But just a way for people to be able to have a longer term view when they're there. Other questions?
Different sort of a question. You've done an impressive job representing the Democratic Party in the legislature. You are now as well. What's your future?
That was gonna be my question.
I wish I knew the answer to that. The question is, what's my future? I can't lobby, at least for 2 years anyway. But I will say I'm still trying to figure that out. Right now, I'm really just focused on being a dad, making up for lost time. I'm coaching like 5 different teams for my girls. And this summer especially, I will really focus on that while they're at an age where they still want me to be around all the time. And I'm enjoying that. I will start this fall to really figure out what I do next, work-wise. I'm not getting out of the fight, I'll tell you that. It's still important to me, and I've invested a lot of time and energy into this. I'm not sure what the best use of my talents and skills will be. I will be honest that my eyes are very much on the Senate seat, the state Senate seat in 2 years when my Senate seat is up. That's very likely. But I'm exploring a lot of options. Thanks.
So, who's your successors now who are running?
Oh, so there are 2 people running in my district. Both have a lot of experience in this world. One is a gentleman that I've ran against actually 8 years ago, and he's worked in the building since then. Ben Murray. Elizabeth Fuchs is actually who I'm supporting and super excited about for the spot. She lobbied for promo for many years. She's a social worker. She teaches at WashU, and she actually coordinates the intern program there. But I think she'd be a really solid voice to advocate for the things that I believe in. But honestly, both of them are, I think, in line with the things I care the most about.
Are you still playing?
Music?
Yes.
So yeah, actually, I mean, I sing more than anything else right now. I sang 3 weddings and a concert this last weekend, and I will probably be doing more of that. I've got a CD, shameless plug, a CD coming out very soon. Please share, and I'll probably have some concerts around that too.
We're gonna know when that CD comes out, like following you.
I mean, I'll put it on. I'll definitely put it on Facebook, but of course, the Facebook algorithm will try and suppress that one because that's what they do.
Give us the Spotify. Spotify, yeah. You started off with Biden bucks, and I've been frustrated on trying to track Biden bucks around. I work for I won't say, in the St. Louis Community College at Wildwood, and we're doing a transformation project that I think in the last board meeting it was reported $67 million have come through the state, have come by the state, and it keeps on saying by the state. But how much of that? What percent? I know for our building, Wildwood, it's been, the governor says he gave $20 million last year to our building, and he gave $20 million this year.
Yeah.
Well, that was all Biden bucks. I believe that was Biden bucks.
What I'm gonna say is, as far as I'm concerned, it's all Biden bucks.
All Biden bucks.
Because if not for the Biden bucks of the last 4 years, our state budget would have been an absolute disaster. I mean, all of the money that we had to be able to even just keep paying the bills that we were paying before is thanks to federal spending into our state. I mean, even the PPP loans and all these other things that were just pumped into the economy, well, that's why our revenue kept going up, right? As a state, that's why income taxes collections kept going up. That's why sales tax collections kept going up, because of federal spending. So even the general revenue of our state, that's thanks to Biden bucks. But virtually every investment in infrastructure, like the buildings you're talking about, came actually directly from Biden bucks, whether that's through the state or through your local government. A lot of them went through the counties as well. That was almost all straight up Build Back Better or COVID funds. House Bill 20 is what we had this year that's got the massive spending on infrastructure. That's all just federal dollars. Thank you.
Shouldn't be.
So I would just say, really, if there is some development happening that is taxpayer funded right now, thank you, Joe. Period.
But they're not getting. They're not doing the signage like darn, Reagan would have or whatever.
I'm hopeful that their
And
campaign moves that direction.
But it's the exact opposite. It's like you can't even fact check it because is there a calculator out there? Is there a way to feasibly search the? Do I just contact the minority staff at the budget committee and tell me? I mean, what's the best
Well,
way?
it wouldn't be from the state, honestly.
Yeah.
I think it would be. You can certainly call Corey's office or Cleaver's office and get some of that. But the problem is, like I said, that money is just kind of all over the place, and it's not easy to break down into a simple format. I think they could do a much better job than they've done, to be fair. Like, I don't think they've done a good job of that at all, because I will tell you, as Democrats, we often get caught up in the details and making sure that the details are exactly right when we say, here's how much money, because if someone's gonna point out, well, actually that one part of that went from the state and that would have happened without the state, now all of a sudden we're stuck in that. And rather than just focusing on, hey, look at this highway project, thank you, Joe. Yeah. Hey, look at this new building, thank you, Joe. Which is what we should be saying, and I will tell you, it is in fact true. We kind of get caught up in the weeds. And so I would say, don't worry about the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Just focus on literally everything that's being done is thanks to that money from the feds.
I am aware, and I passed it on to Lucas Kuntz, but they already had it. Somebody did put together a spreadsheet, so when he's in any politician is any county, he can specifically name where those dollars came from Biden.
I love that. He's actually a good person to ask, yeah.
In fact, I have that, I sent it to him, I'll look at my sent mail because I never clean anything out. Yeah, I would circulate it to.
Yeah, let me.
And I know Corey's office had something similar.
Yeah.
I found it a little bit hard for me to navigate for just
Yeah.
clear message.
I think transportation does okay, but I don't know the rest of it. The education stuff just seems so getting relabeled and.
Yeah. I mean, our school's got a lot of money to keep them afloat in the last couple of years from the feds, and I don't think we're celebrating that nearly enough.
Yeah.
I think that spreadsheet came from Chelsea Rodriguez at the Missouri State Democrat, because she was at the West County News meeting and she had a link to a spreadsheet that drilled down into different areas.
Yeah, I should say, contacting the state party is a really good idea for any of those kinds of resources. They do have a really good comms team. I'm not with the state party. I'm not on the committee or anything. I'm not a committee person. So I'm not here on the party's behalf, obviously. They might have a lot of better answers to some of those questions about messaging and the campaign side than I've got. So don't hesitate to reach out to them for that.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. Do you know that Bill Eigel is going to be interviewed tomorrow in St. Louis on the air? I'm shocked.
I mean, they're going to interview all the gubernatorial candidates, I'm sure, on politically speaking or something on the air. That'll be an interesting segment, I'm sure. I think he may well be their candidate. We'll see.
You do? What?
We'll see.
How about your legislative group? What's the latest on, last time you were here, Missouri, the Missouri House?
In the HDCC. They're doing a lot of great work. I gotta say, I have really, my hands are mostly off of that these days. I'm really proud of the folks that we hired that have now been there for a couple cycles. They're doing killer work, recruiting candidates, training candidates, making sure candidates have the resources that they need, like for basic things like a website and messaging that they can kind of plug and play and then tweak to their own needs. Really good stuff like that, even free headshots, things like that, campaign plans, teaching them how to canvass and how to fundraise. They're doing really good work. I'm very pleased.
It's much better.
Yeah.
Much better.
Kat and Alex are just killer over there. If you get a chance to talk to them, they're a good resource also for connecting you with volunteer opportunities for candidates that you might particularly like or that are close to you. They can tell you which districts we're really targeting where. And I'm really optimistic that this cycle we're going to pick up several seats. We have every cycle since we started running the HDCC. We've picked up a seat each cycle, or 3 this last cycle. I'm expecting more significant progress even this cycle. We want to break out of the super minority this cycle.
We got a shot in both the House and the Senate.
Absolutely.
We do.
Yes, House and Senate, yeah.
Turnout.
Turnout is always key, and I'm really hopeful that the ballot issues are going to help with that too.
Functionally, remind me, what is the advantage of not being a super minority? You have some leverage.
Yeah, so there are lots of things that come up that require a supermajority to pass as a vote. Things like even an emergency clause for a bill to take effect. Those, even right now, when we got as close to out of the superminority as we did, it meant that we had more leverage to negotiate things if they needed our votes to pass one of those things. Obviously, if we can win the governorship, then it changes absolutely everything, because they no longer have the votes just as a party to override a veto. Whereas even having a governorship without getting out of the superminority, it makes it a whole lot harder for that governor to stop the legislature from some pretty atrocious things. Yeah, so let's get Crystal Quaid in there and let's get out of the superminority. Cool, thank you all.
Thank you.